Being recorded.
Buonasera a tutti, good evening and welcome to the Italian Radio Hour. Io sono Viviana and I would like to welcome back our regular listeners and also welcome any new listeners and anyone listening online at khbradio.com. Also be sure to like us on Instagram and on Facebook at the Italian Radio Hour and subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch up on any past episodes. Vorrei dare il benvenuto ai nostri ascoltatori da tutto il mondo, grazie per essere con noi anche oggi mentre continuiamo il nostro viaggio per l'Italia e la cultura italiana. Last week we had an amazing conversation with best-selling author Sarah Gay Forden, the author of The House of Gucci. She was living in Milan and reporting already on the fashion industry from a business perspective when Mario Gucci was assassinated. Following also the developments of the trial, Sarah, in her book, provides an authentic recollection of the rise and almost the fall and the resurrection of the Gucci brand. Then we continue our journey into the fashion industry by talking to Professor Salvatore Giardina from the Fashion Institute of Technology, who recently returned from a study abroad program in Italy, where the FIT students visited some very important mills in northern Italy and got to see firsthand the production of some amazing fabrics. Tonight, we will switch gears a little bit, and for the first time in our program, as we are in a city that is famous for its bridges, we are finally bridging Italy and America with two guests at the same time, one calling from Italy, Andrea Franzoni, and one calling from the US, Michael DiLauro. They've never met before, nor they have talked before, but tonight the topic we will discuss will create a common bond. Second World War's prisoners of wars. But before we get to tonight's guests, let's find out the answer to last week's trivia question. What is the meaning of questa gonna ti sta a pennello? We cannot but choose a fashion-related idiom, so the expression stare a pennello is used to indicate an item that fits you like a glove, more like it was painted onto you. So if you're in a store and a shopkeeper comments that that skirt fits you like a glove, ti sta a pennello, don't leave the store without buying it. Who else would paint it on you? But anyway, we're almost ready to introduce our guests, ma prima pubblicità. Parli italiano? Do you want to learn, improve, or master your Italian? Istituto Mondo Italiano can help. Located in the heart of Regent Square, Mondo Italiano offers small group classes and one-on-one private tutoring to help you learn Italian in no time. Visit us online at www.istitutomondoitaliano.org. Well, welcome back, everyone. I'm very excited to introduce tonight's guest, Andrea Franzoni. Andrea was born and grew up just 7 kilometers from Salò on beautiful Lake Garda. After obtaining a degree in international relations, where he also studied Chinese and English, Andrea spent 3 months in Xi'an, China, to practice the language, and then moved to Taiwan and continued to explore the rest of Asia while raising money, working at local shops and restaurants. After 2 years over there, he moved to Harbin, China, to teach Italian at a local high school for a while. He then returned to Italy, where he found the job of his life calling, taking care of children with disabilities and underserved children. Andrea is currently getting ready to embark on a 600-kilometer cycling expedition called Train Long Gone for Aldo that will trace back the various camps throughout the US, where his grandfather, Aldo Arrighi, was an Italian POW to honor his memory, as Aldo recently passed away, and therefore Andrea missed the opportunity to share this experience with his beloved nonno. Michael Angelo DiLauro earned his MFA in Film Studies from Ohio University. He served as the director of the Academic Media Center and associate professor of media arts, and retired with emeritus status at Robert Morris University. A celebrated director and producer of documentaries and television programs, DiLauro has earned 5 Emmy Awards a blue ribbon from the American Film Festival, and the prestigious Gabriel Award for Outstanding Television Programming. His passion for Italian American culture and identity was recognized by the University of Pittsburgh's Italian American Heritage Award. Additionally, UNICO, the largest American service organization, awarded Michael a Mille Grazie Award for his cultural contribution to the Italian American community. His feature documentary film, Prisoners Among Us, Italian American Identity and World War II, was awarded the Grand Jury Prize for Best Documentary at the New York International Film Festival and the Montreal Film Festival. Benvenuti al nostro programma. Welcome to the program to both of you.
Nice to be here.
Grazie. Hello.
Benissimo. Wonderful. So long introductions, and today is going to be definitely a very interesting conversation. As we have said before, you never met, you never talked, but there is indeed, there are going to be some great stories that you both will be sharing today. So a little bit, let's start with you, Andrea. I'll tell you first how I found out about your story, and then you'll tell us about your story. But it was actually thanks to the Italian Radio Hour and a lovely lady. Her name is Sue Miller, and she's a U.S. Army veteran who about a year and a half ago, during the beginning of COVID, was reading postings on her local Newport News VA Facebook page and found your own page from Villanuova sul Clisi, province of Brescia in Italy. What were you doing at that time?
Well, I was trying to set up my trip to the USA, but actually the pandemic didn't let me put it into effect. So I decided to change the way I would honor my grandpa. It wouldn't have been a trip in the USA, but a virtual one. I was still working at the high school where I was tending the disabled kids that I took care of during that time. And basically, I asked all over the internet for info about the internment camps where Italian prisoners of war were kept at. And this woman, Sue Miller, suggested me to start a Facebook page where the relatives of these kind of prisoners could gather. And that's where Laura Ruberto, a researcher from Berkeley City College and also professor there, joined the group and started giving me a lot of tips. And that's how the project started to take a shape. Basically, I did it because I wanted to honor the memory of my grandpa that passed on so many values to me, and I didn't want his memory to fade away, basically. And at the same time, I saw that the lockdowns were harming psychologically the kids at the high school. They were so depressed at the time. So I felt like doing something like something epic, like, I don't know, The Dark Tower for Stephen King or the Lord of the Rings trilogy for J.R.R. Tolkien. Would be something impressive for them and motivating. And it seems like it worked because I felt them really close during my virtual trip. I was cycling indoor over the route that Grandpa followed as a prisoner of war from the East Coast to the West Coast. The 4 camps were Camp Florence, Camp Apago in Arizona, Phoenix, and Fort Lewis and Fort Lawton in Seattle and Tacoma, Washington.
Okay.
And
Yes, we'll get to those specifics in a little while. And so it looks like just one question to backtrack, and we'll kind of revisit some of the information that you have already shared. So during lockdown, my understanding is that you did this virtual cycling trip, and it was also to get people engaged and motivated. And lockdown was indeed a period that was even tougher for people that were underserved or had some disabilities. So I can just imagine. Why cycling? Is this a hobby or a passion that you always had?
Yes, there's nothing poetic about it actually, because when I was in China, I was playing soccer. A guy tackled me in a really butcher style move, and he killed my joint, my ankle joint. So yeah, that's the only sport that I can do at the moment. But I totally fell in love with it, so no problem at all.
Okay, and so obviously this trip is to honor the memory of your nonno Aldo Arrighi. Let's try to get to know Aldo a little better. Where was he originally from, and any of the stories that he used to tell you, and also something, were you curious about his stories growing up? Because I feel sometimes nowadays people's noses are into technology so much, and even grandparents right now are a little deprived of their storytelling opportunities. So were you curious, or kind of at some point, tell us a little bit about Aldo and your rapport with your nonno?
To tell the truth, I was actually embarrassed by him until like 16, because when I was a middle school student, he used to come and pick my school bag, and I was like, damn, grandpa, please, not in front of all my classmates. But when I started growing up and he started treating me like an adult and talking to me like a peer, kind of, I started enjoying a lot the stories that he used to tell me. Not only about the war, because that's the one, how can I say, that's the topic that made him wet his eyes, basically, the one that he recalled with most pleasure. It's weird to say so, because how can I say, he felt it like a voyage, how can I say, a big trip, so he didn't feel like it was a negative stuff. And not only that, but also about his family. So I started knowing more of his background, and knowing that he was without a mother since he was a teenager, and then without a father when he was like 22 years old, and that his father rejected the fascist card to buy food and stuff, and he was like rejected by everybody because he didn't join the fascist regime. I felt like it was kind of an hero. So yeah, totally loved him.
So Michael, I will jump on you, and then I want to introduce Michael's documentary, Prisoners Among Us, with maybe a couple of the very initial minutes of your documentary, so that people can get an idea of what we will be talking about with you.
There is a story. It is not a new one. Its roots are embedded in the towns and villages of 19th century Italy. But unless it touched you personally and intimately, it is largely unknown to you. Yes, you know about the hundreds of thousands of Italians who left their families to seek for them a better life in a land that promised opportunity. You know about the little Italies that took hold in mostly urban areas. You may even know something about their struggles to assimilate while desperately attempting to maintain their own identities and heritage. What you probably don't know is how this country stumbled along its road to becoming the standard by which liberty and freedom are defined. It stubbed its toe on the hearts and souls of thousands of Italian families, ultimately labeling them enemy aliens at the outbreak of World War II. Some of us are direct descendants of these confused and frightened immigrants. Some may have heard a story or two and shrugged it off as first-generation anecdotes or old-world paranoia. The truth will become alarmingly clear. This story is told in honor of our parents and grandparents, whose sacrifices made our way of life possible. And, like the thousands of pages which chronicle the lives of those who make this country the most ethnically diverse in the world, this chapter in our history must be recorded to fill in the gaps, to right a wrong, to learn from our mistakes.
So, by the way, we want to make sure that people are aware that this beautiful documentary is also available on YouTube to anyone by going to the Michael DiLauro page. Again, Prisoners Among Us, Italian American Identity and World War II. Now, Michael, what was the how the making of this documentary? Where the idea came from? Were you raised also hearing those stories a little bit like Andrea just shared, that his grandfather has stories, or was more for an historical?
Well, actually, the impetus for the story really ties into the POW experience. I was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, and during World War II, my grandmother, Filomena Anguilano, from Ascoli Satriano, the provincia di Foggia, became aware that a cousin of hers was a captured prisoner of war and was living in an army camp about 80 miles west of Cleveland, Ohio. This was Camp Perry, and he was one of many Italian and German POWs living at that camp. And she became aware of her cousin living there, and relatives in Italy were saying, why don't you go visit your cousin? Well, at that time, traveling 60, 70 miles without a car and getting a car to go visit the cousin, was very difficult. But my grandmother managed to visit this cousin a number of times and have picnic lunches with him. And but she went along with her was her daughter Angelina, who wanted to go with her, but my mother Anna and her sister Mary refused to go because they felt they were coddling the enemy. Okay, so there was conflict in our family. My mother didn't want to go, but my one aunt Angelina wanted to go with my grandmother, and they went a number of times. And in fact, my aunt fell in love with one of the POWs there, but ended up marrying a cement truck driver from Cleveland. But that's another story. But one time, while they were visiting Camp Perry and her cousin, they returned to their Cleveland home in an Italian enclave on the west side, and someone broke all the windows in my grandmother's house. And to find out that there were neighbors in the neighborhood, Italians, that were very upset that my grandmother was visiting her cousin, who happened to be a POW. So this was told to me at a family picnic maybe 25 years ago, and that kind of was the seed for the idea of, my goodness, first of all, I didn't know there were POWs, in America at the time, and in the United Kingdom as well. But that was the seed of the idea to start the story of Prisoners Among Us, and then one thing led to another. Then I found out that there were enemy aliens, labeled
We'll get
aliens, and whole immigration issues, and of course the assimilation of first generation Italians into the culture, and all the difficulties that they encountered that I covered in the movie. But the POW experience was really the impetus for my story.
Andrea, let's come back to you. So, when was Aldo in POW camps, and where was it geographically? You mentioned it before. Probably, I don't think we're going to find commonalities between the camps that Michael's family went to versus where Aldo was held. But Andrea, where again, and at what time?
When he was captured in Tunisia, he was captured by the English that gave him to the Americans. He was brought to Fort Eustis in Newport News, Virginia. From there, he jumped on the first train to Camp Florence, and that's the name that he gave to my mother too, Florence.
That's great.
And he stayed there for like 2 or 3 months just to go to Camp Papago in Phoenix. And that was a funny one because some Germans escaped from there. They were from a submarine division. So that's a joke in a joke, because them in the middle of the desert from submarines. So they escaped, but they went back because they were starving. And from there he went to Fort Lawton, Seattle, and that's where he was hanging out with Aileen, a beautiful girl whose father came from Val di Non, Italy, looking for gold in Alaska, but he settled in Seattle. And there he survived to a riot where the only Italian prisoner of war died in the US, Guglielmo Livotto. And from there, he went to Fort Lewis in Tacoma. And he stayed there until October 1945.
Wonderful. And so in the reconstruction of this itinerary, I believe initially you mentioned the name of Professor Laura Ruberto.
Correct.
She's with the University of Berkeley. And
Yes.
is that her specialty?
Migrations of the Italian people and especially prisoners of war. And for example, she quoted some pages from a book where the same experiences that were lived by my grandpa were also lived by other Italian prisoners of war, especially during the riots. They jumped into nettle patches to save themselves from being killed, or into water streams and so on. So, yeah.
Michael, let's come back now to your documentary, because what I really enjoyed is kind of the analysis, and the part of the POWs is towards the end, but the story that the narrative that you're sharing contributed to a bigger and maybe deeper understanding of the conflict between the Italian side and the American side that coexisted in the first generation of the children of the Italians that were born on U.S. soil, with a lot of historical information and details. So let's actually backtrack again, and let's talk a little bit about what the experience was like for the Italians that first came to the U.S. And it wasn't just Ellis Island, right? There were some other bigger concentrations, bigger places that
they immigrated to. Yeah, well, New Orleans was a large port where people came in, and we can't forget the ports in Canada too. There a lot of Italians immigrated to that area as well, beyond Ellis Island. That's for sure. Is the question about what that experience was, or?
Well, initially, you know, when they first came to US, there was probably, you know, people maybe came on invitation of relatives, some others.
Yes, they had the invitation of, but they also had to be sponsored by a padrone, and that padrone serves as a a facilitator of making connections for those immigrants to help them survive, to help them understand some of the paperwork that they had to fill out. Had them understand about schooling, about job placement, about, you know, all the things that were housing, all the things that were so important for them to survive. The padrone was a key figure, and of course, you know, that, I mean, some of that was underhanded as well, because the padrone would take money from them unbeknownst to them and all that stuff. But for the most part, the padrone really served as a guiding light for those struggling immigrants who were, you know, just knew, you know, their own dialect, and stayed in enclaves that were dialect.
Probably people from the same village, maybe.
Same village, sure. So as you know, one dialect is different from another dialect. So even crossing those lines of linguistics were very difficult for them.
Is it true that the French quarters were known at that time as the Little Palermo? And unfortunately, there are some historical events that bring back bad memories.
Oh yes, Little
right.
Palermo. You know what happened with the 13 Italians that were hung in New Orleans in, I believe, 1906 or 1908, and they were unjustly, you know, murdered or hung for crimes they didn't commit, and which was, you know, very unfortunate. Yeah. Yeah.
And and then, you know, we're moving into a different historical. We're moving into the 20s. You know, we had the Sacco and Vanzetti story, you know, of them being charged with robbery, whereas they were just, I think, divulging their pamphlet, their political material.
And then people like Carlo Tresca and those people that were the anti-fascists working with unions in the United States, and you know, obviously against everything Mussolini stood for. Now, but I do want to leap forward a little bit to the POWs, because there were some POWs that I've documented, one in particular in my film that was an ardent fascist, even as a POW. I mean, he didn't want anything to do with the United States, and he didn't want anything, you know, he didn't want to serve as an abiding POW while he was captured, where, you know, many of the, probably 99% of the 50,000 POWs that were in the United States were very accommodating. They worked, they helped, you know, they worked in non-combative areas, working in orchards and working on farms to help, because, you know, the American men were serving overseas, and they filled a gap in the workforce in, you know, non-combative areas, you know, like farming and orchards, and helping out on that end.
Yes. So yes. So, you know, the first generation settles in, and then the children come along, and now you have the first generation, and that's where the identity struggle starts to manifest itself, because you had, on one hand, you know, a pretty Italian upbringing in the house, whereas maybe in the school system or in the social life, children were expected to behave in a certain way, to be more Americanized. And you know, and probably for the parents, the ones coming straight from Italy, I don't know if they really grasped that the first generation was going through that dilemma, because they kind of didn't have it. They came to the US as grown-ups.
There was a conflict. There was, even in my family, I mean, there was a conflict with my parents not necessarily wanting to pass on even the language to my generation, because they wanted to become, they were so desperate and yearned this big desire to be Americanized. And many people, as we all know, changed the vowel endings to their last names to become more American. And I mean, I know one man who was a policeman. His Italian name was Alacqua, and he changed it to Tony Waters. I mean, just to change it, so he became, you know, perceived as becoming more very Americanized. And so that was a conflict in many families, including my own.
Yes. And I'll come back to you in just one second. The other thing was probably education, kind of a double-edged sword, because on one hand, it was going to be the way out from a life of, you know, basic means to pursue a better life for the new generation, but also the families understanding that education, all that studying, would probably have taken the kids away from the nest, so to speak.
Way beyond the financial hardship as well. Yeah. Take them away. And then I think that, you know, why my grandmother, you know, we all lived in this Italian enclave, but when some of my aunts and uncles moved out to the suburbs, we may as well have moved 1,000 miles away, because my grandmother could not understand, why would you want to leave Little Italy to move 15 miles away? And, you know, we're not going to see you as often. And that was a big struggle for them. Just that separation, as you indicated, it could be just a suburb away, but to them it could be 1,000,000 miles. You know.
Andrea, so let's bring you back with your journey. Again, anything that you want to share about your nonno along the conversation, but I think also the itinerary that you have put together. You are going to be 3 days away from your departure once we share this conversation with the public. So what's your starting point and what's your finish point?
I will start from Seattle, and even though it isn't the last camp that he stayed at, it is the center of his memories, because that's where he hanged out with Eileen, the woman that I mentioned before. She lived in Magnolia district with her family. And in 2015, when my grandfather was really nostalgic, I managed to contact his nephew and to put them in contact. So this time I will finally manage to meet him, and I will bring some flowers to the graves of my grandfather's friends that settled in Seattle, like they were born in 1886 and surroundings, and moved there and stayed there until the 50s. And then I will move down to Fort Lewis, sorry. That's where I will meet journalist Craig Saylor from the Tacoma News Tribune, and he will escort me to Fort Lewis just to visit and feel the ground that Grandpa walked on beneath my feet. And then it will be a really long way until I get to Arizona. That's the part that frightens me most because of the scorching weather. And I will get to Camp Papago and Camp Florence. Camp Papago has become a golf course now, so basically nothing is left of it. But Camp Florence is still a military facility, so it's going to be possible to visit the old barracks and what's left of the old camp. That's where Grandpa started cooperating and picking up cotton As Michael said before, many of the Italian prisoners of war were collaborazionisti. They cooperated, and he was one of them. It wasn't difficult for him to say no to fascism.
Yes, yes, and also, Michael, you touch upon the conditions that these camps were, which for some of them were not so bad, so to speak.
That's correct. In the film, a gentleman by the name of Libro Puccini, he's from Elba, and he settled here in the Cleveland area, and but he was at Camp Perry, and he couldn't believe that he had clean sheets and hot and cold water, and being out in the desert in Africa, I believe it was Alamein where he was captured. He was pleasantly surprised and pleased that the accommodations were so good compared to what he was used to serving in the Italian army in North Africa for a number of years. So yes, and there was another love interest, and a woman came out there, and they ended up getting married and living happily ever after. But many of the POWs that I had the opportunity to interview were very pleased with the accommodations and as Andrea noted earlier, many of the soccer matches against the German counterparts at the camps as well. They enjoyed that as well.
Now, obviously, for the prisoners of war that were released, some of them went back to Italy. Someone had, some love connections. Some went back to, the ones who went back to Italy. Some were, supporting the fascism, but some others were also seen as traitors, so to speak. I mean, it wasn't easy even to go back after their release.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it wasn't easy, and actually they had to stay in it when they returned to Italy. I believe they had to stay there for at least a year or so before they could come back and marry. I think it was the Italian brides going to Italy. They get married in Italy, and then they can come back after a year. I think that's how.
Andrea, when your grandfather was talking about his memories, because obviously coming back to any world conflict, I mean, here we're talking about the accommodations being better than what they expected, but no one wanted the worst. So obviously, so was he also talking about some of the kind of tougher emotions, or was it difficult for him to talk about those stories?
I think that my grandpa was a really strong person. He how can I say, he went through many sicknesses during his life, but he found the strength to found a volunteer association, blood and organs donation association, and even how can I say, be the president of these ones. So I feel like he didn't feel war as a painful experience, but just how can I say, a way of maturation. I don't know the English word for it. It's like
growing up. Like
okay, yeah, that's right. It made him a better man, basically. And he even laughed about it sometimes. Like one time, he used to laugh a lot about this one. He was riding a motorbike, back to back with the guy that was riding it. He had to unravel a cable through the warfield to set up a radio connection, and he fell down the bike. And when the other guy reached the destination, the general was like, "Where the hell did he end up?" And they had to go back and pick him up in the battlefield. He was laughing about it. Yeah, it was amazing.
Well, Michael, so let's talk about when Italy entered war. Okay, all of a sudden, so to speak, there is, again, the Italian American identity is thrown again in this state of flux. But it seems to be that the Italian Americans that fought, I mean, there was no question about loyalty. There was a big number of casualties, actually.
Well, yes, the Italian Americans suffered the highest casualties of any ethnic group in the American forces. Okay, and I attribute to that because because Italian immigrant or the Italian population was probably the least educated. So who was in the front lines? Who was in the foxholes? It was mostly Italians. It's no different than African Americans in Vietnam. They were probably the least educated, and who had the highest casualty rate in Vietnam was African Americans. So I think that's a parallel there, where because the Italians, basically had a very small window to assimilate once they got here after 1910, 1915. They only had 30, 40 years to assimilate into the culture. So they were the ones that were in the infantry, and they suffered the highest casualty rate of any ethnic group in World War II.
And then I believe I remember when in the documentary, when they were signing up for the Air Force, now the Navy, now Army will take anyone. That's kind of goes also to your point that they were indeed put in the forefront.
Right.
And then there's word allegiance. So before, there are. So what happens then to the Italians that stay behind? This is the beginning of the untold story of things that were happening as those Italian American children were in the front. They're fighting for the US. They're also fighting for the US because they feel that that is the land that has given their parents dignity and opportunity. So there was no question about their loyalties, but things are happening in the background. And can you tell us a little bit about what was happening?
Okay, well, that large chunk of my story, anyway, and a large chunk of the Italian American identity crisis was the idea that over 600,000 Italians living in the United States were labeled enemy aliens, and those people were scrutinized. They shortwave radios were confiscated. There were curfews imposed on them. Flashlights, cameras were confiscated from those people who were deemed enemy aliens. Most of them, the majority of them, were non-citizen Italians, those people that didn't bother or find it necessary to become citizens because they were happy living in their little Italian enclaves where they spoke, continued to speak the language, and really didn't become matriculated into the society in the Italian American Italian culture. So there were 600,000 people labeled enemy aliens, and of those 600,000, I'm not sure of the number at this point, but maybe a couple thousand were actually interned like the Japanese Americans. I mean, not necessarily those, didn't have the numbers like the Japanese Japanese interns, but there were a number of those interned at internment camps throughout the, mostly in the West, in Missouri, Arizona, in California. California had a whole bunch of internment camps, and most of the enemy aliens were on the West Coast, some on the East Coast, not so much in the Midwest. It was usually the coastal areas, East, West, where they thought that those people might be a threat to the security of the Americans and those fighting for the American cause.
So I would assume that, let's assume in a family there was a mother, maybe too busy raising the family, didn't get naturalized, and the children, the husband, they got split, or if your school was across this line, these boundaries, not complete. So their lives just were upside down.
Yeah,
disrupted for not knowing for how long. And I think one of the ladies said that she shared her pins collections with her schoolmates before moving on to wherever is going to be the unknown. So what happened at some point? When was this state removed under?
Yeah, I mean, it was those people that were deemed enemy aliens. A part of it, part of the this stamp on them was released with the re-election of President Roosevelt, because Roosevelt wanted the Italian vote, and he knew that without the Italian vote, his chances of being re-elected may be in grave danger. So he rescinded that enemy alien status in part because of a re-election, and not necessarily because he, really wanted to even do that. But he really that was the primary cause, and it actually happened he rescinded that on Columbus Day in like 1942 when that was released. So that was a big deal, and of course doing that on Columbus Day to most Italian Americans was a big deal, and he got their vote. So that's how that happened.
So the big question is, specific for this, is why didn't we hear about this before? So for some reasons, even the Italian Americans didn't talk about it.
Absolutely. I mean, I've shown this film so many times to so many different populations, and everybody says, I never knew. I never heard about this. And I think the Italians are proud people, and perhaps they didn't want to make a big fuss about it and maybe sweep it under the rug and forget about it. And they weren't interested in reparations for that dark time in their history, while so the reparations weren't even an issue. So they, didn't want to deal with it, and thought they could move on and continue that assimilation. I think if they raised a big stink about it, that might hurt them in their assimilation process as well. That might be a dark mark on that and make it more difficult.
So to go back to Andrea, when we kind of analyze a little bit some of the core values or some of the personalities in that strength and that pride, that sense of pride, that in the case as the enemy aliens, people didn't want to talk about. And also, as you say, Andrea, your nonno Aldo seemed to be a pretty proud person, pretty strong person. Andrea, do you feel that you have inherited that strength and that pride from your nonno?
Definitely. I feel like I am proud, but also humble as he was, because how can I say, when it comes to my project, for example, I don't care about having my name on newspapers and so on, or my face on the cover. I just want the project to be under the spotlight. And that was my grandpa, basically.
Well, we're still going to get your name out, at least on our side of the show. And can you tell us, because unfortunately we do, for those of you who might enjoy this interview via video, your picture is there, but it's cutting off your face. Again, you don't want to show your face. So we're seeing your bike. Also, your bicycle has a story, right?
Correct. Well, cocaine is a big problem in not only my area, but in the whole Italy, in the whole nation. So having it touched my family personally, I decided to start a project with an artist located in Brescia, and I bought a raw frame without any paint on it, and I started painting it with Uniposca, the markers, and a little artwork came out. It represents the works of Keith Haring, the ones that he did against crack and HIV, and it is kind of modernized and personalized, and I really love that bicycle. It's really it was meant to be that way, basically.
Wonderful. So, as I said, in some of the stops, I mean, when you have put this itinerary together, and we will give also the contact details for everyone to join your journey in the many different ways that they are able to, whether it is through, you know, just a supporting word, maybe it's through your GoFund, or maybe, I don't know if you're still looking for hosts along the way. Are there some, so you have, I looked at your California, I looked into your Washington State and your Portland itinerary. There are some interesting stops, obviously in San Francisco, you said is the kind of the one place where you allow yourself to be just a tourist, right?
Definitely. A cultural tourist still.
Yes, and then you were talking about the dichotomy a little bit of Los Angeles.
Yeah, I was inspired by a movie, Crash. I don't remember the movie maker, but it is all about contact. I don't remember if the sentence was like the only way to get close to each other in Los Angeles is to crash into each other with a vehicle. So I felt like it is the how can I say, the epicenter of the how can I say, the American dream that turned a little bit sour, kind of. Like a rat race, basically, and yeah. But still, I like it.
Then there is a destination, and Michael, if also you know anything about these places, feel free to chime in. But I think it's called the Slabs. Slabs Free City, the last free place in America.
Yeah. That was like a marine facility, and it became a place for those people that rejected society, or that was rejected by society. And they decided to set up their RV vehicles or tents there, and it became their city, basically. Did you visit, Michael?
No, no. I'm not familiar with that. I'm familiar with the Tent City. Is that what you're talking about?
It was a camp. It was a marine camp, Camp Dunlop.
No, I'm not familiar with that.
So there are these cement, concrete slabs that are left over there. Let me see. Then Portland. You're kind of concerned a little bit about the elevation there, right? But you have some inspiring people either to meet or to think when you are in Portland. Tell us a little bit about Portland.
Well, I will meet so many people that I should take like 3 episodes of your podcast to talk about them.
It would be nice if we can do another one while you're on the road, just for a little update.
Yeah. The one that I liked most was George Mount. I saw a really nice black and white picture in his profile picture, So I Googled his name, and it turned out that he was a racer that also raced in Italy, along with Roberto Visentini, which was the winner of Giro d'Italia of 1986. So I contacted Roberto Visentini, which lives like 10 kilometers far from my house. He has a funeral home. And we took a picture together and made a video, and we sent it to Georgia to say hello to him. And it was fantastic to again create a bridge between Italy and the USA. Yeah.
Wow. Then one more place, and then I'll come back to Michael. So then Washington State, there is a gigantic bicycle festival waiting for you, right?
Correct. Again, I have to thank Sue for this because she managed to contact them, and then she put in contact with them. She put me in contact with them, and they granted me a pass to stay at their festival for 2 days. I will manage to stay there for only 1 day, but I think it will be amazing, just amazing.
Wow,
Okay.
wonderful.
Yes, so so this is going to be, you're going to fly from Verona into Seattle on August the 9th, and I'm trying to remember that in US they put the month first and then the date. And then you're going to leave from Phoenix, going back to New York and Milano on October the 18th. So you're going to be on this side of the world for some time. We're almost done, but I wanted Michael to maybe tell us a little bit, as Andrea shared some of the names that maybe Italians are familiar with, or that are important names can you mention some of the captains or some of the people that were praised for their efforts during World War II? I think there was...
Yeah. I read Tom Brokaw's book, who used to be an NBC anchor television, and he mentioned a fellow by the name of Gino Merli, who lived in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Gino Merli was awarded the Medal of Honor. So I went to interview Gino Merli in Scranton, and he was suffering from Parkinson's disease, and I didn't think it was right for me to interview him. He's just too ill. But I went back to Tom Brokaw and I said, would you talk about Gino Merli on camera? And he was very gracious and did so in the movie, and he was very eloquent about that. So yes, there was that, and of course there was
there is Captain Gentile. I think he was Captain
Gentile, who was an aviator and shot down many German planes during the war, and we had medals all over. And there were a number of them that Italian Americans that were war heroes, and that's part of the story. Yes.
Well, our time is unfortunately up, and obviously it's clear from both the stories is that the people that inspired us, there are our heroes, whether also they fought in a war or they're just important people, our nonni. But the main thing is also for, again, listen up, ask those questions, trying to document, especially if it is also an older generation that, unfortunately might not be around for too long, because this is history, and people can have the luxury to hear firsthand stories. So I love my cell phone, but put it down, ask those questions, put them on the video, and make memories, and pass them those stories again to the newer generation that now could be 3 levels removed from those stories.
Vivian, I have a suggestion for Andrea. Maybe he can send you a video clip every so often. You can update on your radio show, like here he is. This is what happened, or kind of a little update for your radio audience.
That would be great. Yeah.
Yes, and people can also follow Andrea directly onto his page. The mission is called Train Long Gone Tribute to Aldo Arrighi. We'll have plenty of links, and the Instagram page, the GoFundMe page, so that again we can all be participating into commemorating the memory of Aldo, and also all the POWs that have fought in the war. So for this, I'm going to say my goodbyes to both of you, and we will be in touch and keeping some updates. So
nice to meet you, Andrea, and thank you, Viviana.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you very much.
Grazie. So il Big Ben ha detto stop. It is time for us to say arrivederci alla prossima. We want to thank you for tuning in into the program. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us at the Italian Radio Hour at gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. So who will be our guest next week? Next week, we will talk to archaeologist, baker, and food writer Farrell Monaco, whose research centers on food waste, food preparation, and food-related ceramics in the Roman Mediterranean, and her recreation of loaves of bread, panis quadratum, that bring the characteristics of the carbonized bread loaves from Pompeii that she was able to study and analyze. And remember, if you or any of your family and friends have missed a prior episode or would like to listen to this episode again, please visit our website at www.istitutomondoitaliano.org and click on the Italian Radio Hour tab. Vorremmo ringraziare I nostri ospiti Andrea Franzoni e Michael DiLauro, il nostro sponsor Istituto Mondo Italiano e alla Boara per la musica. Finally, before we leave, here is our language trivia for next week. What does? Chi non ha pane, chi ha il pane non ha i denti, chi ha i denti non ha il pane. Again, chi ha il pane non ha i denti, chi ha i denti non ha il pane. You can send in your answers at the Italian Radio Hour at gmail.com. If you're not living in the Pittsburgh area or might be out of town, remember you can catch us streaming live at khbradio.com every Thursday at 5 o'clock. And be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook at the Italian Radio Hour. Until next time, alla prossima, ciao ciao.